Hey everyone, welcome back to episode number 2 of Beyond the Dirt podcast. Today we're going to get into streambank stabilization and what we see in our rivers, our streams, our creeks, whatever you want to call them, big, small, and different. We got them all up here in Howard County. I think that's what makes us so special, among all the other things, is that we are at the top of a lot of watersheds. And we talk about at the top of watersheds, we talk about beginning of streams. And a lot of our streams, as simple as it may be, start from a tile line, and then eventually flow into a little bit larger body of water, into what maybe people would call a creek or a stream, and then eventually into a fully fledged river, lake, pond, all the above. And so that's really what we want to focus on today is the water aspect. And it couldn't be more fitting that right now we are now contracting and obligating a handful and a half of stream bank stabilization projects here in Howard County. And I think the first thing we need to really dive in and try to make you guys understand the best we can is where we get the money for them, because they can be expensive projects depending on how big or small these areas are. And so to have a funding source that helps pick up a good chunk or not all the cost is very important. And also I'll let Neil get in on the explanation of our alphabet soup since he's the master of this, and kind of try to explain the best we can as to what we use for funding to get these projects on the ground.
Well, yeah, Hunter. When I first started working here 21 years ago, the EQIP program is pretty much the program that we use to fund stream bank stabilization. It's the Environmental Quality Initiative Program, EQIP. And back in the day, that was a 50% cost share program, kind of like our state programs are. And a lot of these stream bank projects are very expensive because we're using the DOT riprap and some of these large weir stones. So the cost can be pretty prohibitive, especially when we're talking about, it's non-crop land, obviously. It's down along the pasture areas. It's not eligible for CRP at a high rate or anything like that. So when we first started these at 50% cost share, some of these projects were, 40, 50, $60,000, and we got talked about it a little bit in our last program. But the cost of return on investment, like I said, is a noble cause to do this stream work, but it can be pricey. Well, then they kind of changed how the EQIP program works, and now it's incentive based. So they give a certain dollar amount per foot incentive for having the practice. So once it meets the spec and design of the NRCS, then that incentive is paid out. So when you get your allotment of how much your incentive will be, you get your design. We send the people out to talk to contractors to get bids to see how much of that will be covered. And as of the last few years, it's been covering it at a pretty good rate. It doesn't guarantee that what percentage of the project will be covered, but we've been up in that 75% plus, and that really helps sell the project, especially, like I said, it's that return on investment. So primarily that's primarily what we do. I know some watershed projects will have specifics. If the project is based on sediment reductions, sometimes they'll have some additional state monies for that. But primarily with us, we're working with the EQIP program.
You said EQIP is a national funded program, right?
Yeah, and but there's like different pots of money. Usually when someone comes in and they're interested in it, especially if they live in the northeast part of the county in what we call the driftless region, there is a couple different pots of money. One is the RCPP. I'm not going to get into all the meanings of all this, but it is another pot of money that the Trout Unlimited have been really influential in getting an additional pot of money just for the driftless region. There's another pot of money in the EQIP. It's called Riverine, or we could just use regular EQIP funds. Riverine is just another pot of money. We have a tremendous well to go to on a lot of these different projects. But like I said, primarily we go to the EQIP program, and we'll usually, like I said, we'll run it through both, and sometimes one pot of money will have more money at one year than the other, or sometimes we get later in the season and not all the money's been used up, and then we'll be awarded a few more. They call it pre-obligated. So then that's when we really get busy and make sure that we have all our T's crossed and I's dotted and make sure that everything is ready for that funding and writing that contract.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess what I heard was the long and the short is EQIP's the way to go. It's a national program, federal funded program, where you can get an incentive payment there, but within EQIP, there's kind of four different pots of money that you could be eligible for, depending on where you're located in the state, and meet those ranking criteria. So the easy answer, EQIP. The long answer, four different pots of money where you live. So of course, government, we always got to keep it complicated, and we can't ever just make it a one all easy program. But honestly, once you kind of understand it, it really is pretty simple. And you'd fill out an application for every pot of money, and we'll see which one you fall into and get picked up at. So,
well, that kind of where it falls into our lap to navigate these programs. I mean, our titles are called Project Coordinator, and it's definitely a big part of that is finding the right funding source and making sure that all that groundwork is laid out so that when we do get to that point in time where the federal dollars do start flowing out to the state, we're ready to capture some of those dollars for our producers.
yeah, so I mean, kind of our first step whenever we're working with a producer who has some erosion that they need to take care of in their streams, our first line of attack is get an application signed, get them in those right pots of money, and then we really start to get our boots on the ground. We get out into the nettles, the parsnip, the snow, whatever time of the year it may be, and we begin the process of seeing what we got out there and ground truthing it and doing all that good stuff. And so really our first line that we always got to do is called I&E, which is basically information and education. We want to get out there and see what we're dealing with. A lot of these streams, we could do stream bank stabilization on every single outside bend, but sometimes that's not able to do. We'd be there a long time, let's just say that.
Well, it wouldn't be feasible. I mean, so what we're usually targeting is areas of that bank that are eroding and receding that are either approaching farmland, a farmstead. It might be a lane for a farmer to get back to another field. It's something that has some value. Not that every part of your land is invaluable, but I mean, literally we can't rip-rap everything from Minneapolis to New Orleans and in between. But we do target it to those sensitive areas and to the areas that are going to do the most good. So it takes a little like that I&E. I know Hunter and I have been to a program training. It's called SWIM. It's not about swimming down the creek, but it's about assessing a stream for what characteristics are needed to alter that back to a more stable situation. So there's a lot of science that goes into it, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But gonna have Hunter talk about some of the survey and some of the nuts and bolts of getting some of this done. And back as far as the I&E, it's not just us coming out. So we kind of do the footwork on finding these jobs, and we'll have a team from the NRCS that comes out and actually signs off our area engineer's office to make sure that these are appropriate and good sites too.
So once we've really got out there and got a good grasp as to what we're working with and what the land's looking like in the banks and stuff, we get those waders on, we jump in the creek, and we start doing some surveying. And so basically we want to know what the riparian zone out from the stream is, all the way to the bank, to in the water, to the substrate, the depth of the water, and trying to get as good as a profile as we can get so that we know either A, how tall those banks are, how bad they're cutting, how quickly they're cutting, how far we could shape a bank back if we got some riparian zone to work with. Maybe we only have 10 foot till we hit a crop field, and that farmer doesn't want to lose any more crop ground, and he'd rather work with the slope that he's got and try to do that. And so those are things that we kind of got to take into consideration when we're out there surveying. We'll do the whole stretch where the project would be needed as far as the stream bank stabilization on those curves, trying to get as many cross sections and profiles as we can so that once we get into the next step, the design process, while we're sitting at our computers, we still have a really good idea of what that stream looks like. Even some of these projects that we survey on, we have a lot of applications, we have a lot of projects, and we're not able to survey and design them all ourselves. And so we try to do all the surveys ourselves, but sometimes we have to forfeit the design process to someone else. And so it's really crucial to us to get a really good survey and really good profile of the stream out there, so that we have the opportunity to send that to someone else where they could then see what points we took, they could see the profile, and they'd be able to design it even without being out there with us during the survey process. And so it's really important for us to get as many points and good points while we're surveying, so that when we do get into the design process, it's as simple as can be.
It's kind of neat. This part of the state, being we're in the driftless, we have a lot of cold water streams, trout streams. So that kind of plays in it too. If these are what we call a cold water trout, trout are naturally reproducing them, that they kind of go to the top of the list. So part of that I&E is we do fish surveys. So a lot of the streams in our watersheds, plus some around the county, if we kind of deem that maybe they might have trout in them. There was one stream in particular. We had a gentleman up here from the University of Iowa State University was working on his master's in trout migration, and we're just like, hey, we got this stream, we're kind of wondering what's in it. We know it's cold water, and we ended up finding some pretty nice fish. Not only did we find trout, brown trout, but we found some of the species that help feed the trout. So there's a lot of stuff. The ecology of a stream, macroinvertebrates, that's another thing. One of the I&E things we'll do. We'll go in and just see is there food for the trout and that kind of stuff. So that kind of plays into the whole whether a stream is going to be able to be restocked with brook trout or something like that. But those are some other things that what we would call the assessment of that stream. SVAP is what we call it, where there's probably 20 different categories that we're actually looking at, and it's the stream bank, the substrate, that habitat, and all of that kind of the riparian. Do we got trees on the outside? Do we have grass on the outside? All those things go into a ranking process that help. So the higher quality of the stream, the better chances it will be funded. But also, it's about people's threshold for pain. Sometimes someone calls us out and says, "Oh, my stream looks terrible," and we're like, go out there and it's like, wow, that's like one of the nicest stretches ever.
Yeah.
There really isn't anything we need to do to enhance that. But then sometimes we have these big, raw, ugly banks on there that are really letting that sediment get into the stream. So.
Yeah, it's our job. We're never going to deny an application or a producer coming on in wanting to sign up for a program and whatnot, but it's then our job and our duty to get out there and take a peek at what it is. And there is that threshold that we have to draw the line at. And if we don't think it's severe enough erosion, we got to have that blunt conversation and say, hey, you got a beautiful stream out here. We don't need to be doing any work. And sometimes you do more damage if you have a nice stream and you try to rip into it and open up some of that dirt for erosion and whatnot. And so sometimes it's best to leave those be at times. But keeping going through the process, once we do get that surveyed, get it all designed, like Neil said, we work very close with our NRCS engineering staff down in West Union, our area engineer, and making sure that our plans meet spec and all the numbers are adding up and whatnot, and get them approved. And once we get them approved, now we're kind of on the straight and narrow and looking for some money. And one of the things we always got to do is attain all our permits from the Iowa DNR and the Army Corps of Engineers, so that they understand that we're not altering the stream or blocking fish passage in any ways. And so we got to be able to have detailed design plans in there, as well as maps showing where the stream was, where it currently is, what we're doing, and making sure in a very clear manner that we're not blocking fish passage by any means, because that's really one thing that they were looking for and making sure we're not doing, because we don't want to alter the stream in that way in any shape or form.
A couple of the other assessments we have to have done that one we kind of take a look at, but wetland determinations, we got to make sure it has a certified wetland determination made, because like I said, some of these areas are pretty sensitive, and one thing we don't want to do is get anybody in trouble, either with the Army Corps, the Iowa DNR, or NRCS compliance, which is the wetlands. So sometimes we'll have some excess soil after the project is being done, so we want to make sure if there is wetlands there, we're not trying to fill those in or doing anything within that flood zone to do anything to alter that would have a negative. The other thing is cultural resources. There's lots of boxes we got to check, and cultural resources is another one. Native American, obviously, the Native Americans were pretty abundant in this part of the state, so we got to be a watch out for some of that stuff. Anything we might notice, and we've been to trainings for those things too. So that's a couple more boxes that we have to check.
A lot of boxes we got to check. I mean, like Neil just mentioned, all those, getting the permits, and once we get the permits obtained and finally ready to rock and roll, then it's basically to check the box and get the funding. And that's a lot easier said than done sometimes. And some of these projects maybe sit in our drawer for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It's just hard to say. But once they get picked up for funding, we really need to go to bat for them, and making sure we got, like we said, our I's dotted and our T's crossed, and making sure everything's aligning. And once that happens, get the go ahead and start to do the fun stuff and start getting it built. And sometimes it gets very stressing when you're working on them, getting them funded and whatnot, and all the surveying and the designing and permitting process and whatnot. But once you finally get that money secured and you know you're a go for progress, then it's time to really have some fun and watch the contractors get down and dirty in there with the excavators and do the work, which really is a beauty of its own. Watching some of these contractors work and how well they work, and I mean, some of these stones maybe weigh almost a ton, and they're able to put those stones in there within a tenth of an inch or whatever it is. And so it's pretty impressive once you finally get through that whole planning process. It's not always fun. It sometimes can be boring. It might be boring listening to it right now, but once you get to that construction part, it really is a blast. So
and that's one of the things, what I know Hunter and I like to do is we like to see what the resource concern is, if we've got these really damaged banks that are eroding, and then seeing the process. Sometimes the process is kind of messy. Sometimes it takes, like Hunter says, a long time. But once that project is approved and we got all the T's crossed and I's dotted, and it gets to go forward, it gets funded and gets built, wow, what a transformation. I mean, these streams, and, kind of one of the problems that our streams have, the state of Iowa is probably one of the most altered landforms in the world. I mean, you consider what Iowa looked like pre-settlement when before the pioneers got here. It was tall grass prairie, some timber, some of that stuff. Things were kind of held in place by these long, deep-rooted native grasses, and unfortunately, some of the farming techniques that we first started out with might have worked good on flat land out east, but when we got to some of this rolling hills and stuff, we had a lot of movement of soil. And what has happened is in these valleys where these streams are is what we call post-settlement alluvium. So all the soil was up on the hillsides is sloughed down into the valleys, and so now that's why you got the stream, which would have been a cold water stream, babbling brook, and the cobblestone and all that kind of stuff in a grassy area. Now you may have 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 feet of sediment that's slipped off the hills down in these valleys. So now you've got this stream that naturally is moving. The whole idea of how watching these streams move. I mean, some of that training we go to, we see how some of this operates. But once again, it is that altered. It's not natural. It's a lot of that what we've done man-made has caused some of the problems in these streams. So then now that all that alluvium, that settlements, or all that sediments come off, is slowly making its way to the Gulf of Mexico. And so our goal is to try to keep it here on the land, try to keep our soil here, and try to tame down some of that wild movement of soil that, like I said, it wasn't naturally like that. But obviously we got to have to feed the world, and we're going to work with that. But there are some practices that we can do, and this is one of them that will definitely help the stream corridor.
Yeah, I mean, streams naturally, I think you were kind of alluding to it, they're naturally meandering, which is basically it's going back and forth. And what that is doing, it's self-slowing down is what it's trying to do. I mean, water's always going to flow at a constant rate, but it's just like a slide. If you got a straight slide, it's a lot faster versus if you got a slide that has some meanders or some turns in it. It's a lot slower then. The stream's really the same way. I mean, naturally, let's say beginning of time, the streams always meandered, so they stayed at the nice constant rate. Since then, like you alluded to, we've done some man-made structures. We've straightened streams, which then increase the velocity, which then causes the streams to trying to re-meander themselves, working themselves back up and back down, and eating at those banks so that they can slow their own velocity down and trying to solve their own problem. And the problem with that is it takes hundreds, thousands, millions of years sometimes to re-meander and get itself reestablished in those banks, when we've maybe done too much work in some spots and straighten those out. So, I mean, that's kind of really the reason why we need stream bank stabilization is you see these high cutting banks and a lot of soil, a lot of post-sediment alluvium you see in the streams, a lot of silt in the streams. And so it's kind of our job then to try to find what the best Band-Aid approach would be, to get those areas fixed. And this is one of the best bang for our buck, and that's why we've been pushing it so hard. And I mean, then you get into the next part where it's kind of two different things that you can go to as far as getting the structure built. We can do the more traditional approach where we're sloping the banks back, and putting the rock down there, and trying to hold the bank in its toe, what we would call it. The toe is where the water is meeting the bank. And so we can do that, or we can go, if we got some really tall banks with some steep slope, we can even work inside the stream channel, or stream bank, I guess you should say, and kind of build inside, because these streams of what they've done is while they've gotten straightened out and they're trying to re-meander now, instead of staying narrower and deeper like we normally would see or prehistorically would see, we're now seeing wider and shallower streams because of the amount of sediment that's been deposited there. And so it gives us some different options that we can do, but really the problem that we're trying to fix is the speed of the water and what's going on up and above and down below.
You know, one of the things that we were learning at our swim training, which is a watershed approach to stream work. Tom Eisenhardt is a professor at Iowa State, and he's kind of one of the guys that originally started this whole stream assessment protocol that we use in assessing these streams. And you know, one of the things is the hydrology of a stream. So there's like different stages of a stream. So some of these streams, you know, over time, like I said, is a very altered landscape that we have, and a lot of times individuals try to straighten the stream out. Well, that has a tremendous effect not only on the stretch that has been straightened, but it affects above and below, because when that water speeds up, it creates more velocity and beats up those banks below, and it also is pulling from above and accelerating that water speed from above. So there's like several levels of graduated timing of what streams are doing to try to get back to their natural meander state. And it's actually kind of interesting. We were looking at some maps that were done like in the 1940s, and they had straightened these streams, and it took, you know, maybe 20-30 years, but those streams went right back to their old meander. So we're not going to be able to stop that, but we don't want to hold it in that straight position either. And that's probably one of the things that affect us too, is we're not going to be able to go out, have a straightened stream and try to keep it straight, because that's not natural either. And we haven't really gotten into what, you know, we've been to some symposiums on Streambank up at the Driftless Symposium up in La Crosse that the DNR puts on, and they really get into it. They'll even take a stretch that might have a straight ditch cut into it, and they will actually put the meanders back in, put the riffles back in, stabilize those banks. But that gets pretty costly, and that's kind of beyond what our scope of what we're trying to achieve. You know, we're trying to kind of, like I said, tame some of those most aggressive bank erosions and recession rates. But there's a lot. It's a wide spectrum of what we can do with streams, but you know, we'll get into a few of these other things. But you know, in my watershed, I know when we started, once again, just like cover crops, I really wasn't looking at working in the streams. And then we got to the point where we were reintroducing the brook trout, and then we were doing temperature monitors, and the quality of the water was improving. And then we got some of these funding sources. But you know, it's not just fixing the stream. You also have to fix the upland. And that's where Hunter and I in our watershed projects, especially with the cover crops, the reduced tillage, the buffer strips, all that kind of stuff, we're trying to reduce the amount of sediment getting into the stream. And we'll talk a little bit more about how a stream carries sediment a little bit after a couple things we're going to talk about here. But it's not just this is what you can do. It's part of that whole farm planning and honestly the whole watershed planning. Because if you don't fix what's happening on the upland, there's no point in working in the stream itself, because you're either going to continue getting more sediment, or we're not going to be able to slow down that water and filtrate it on the land instead of running down through those flood events.
I feel like we almost should even call this practice stream bank stabilization. I feel like it should be called stream bank restoration, because really what we're trying to do is we're trying to restore that stream, that segment of stream, back to what it traditionally was. I mean, it's not like we're trying to throw something completely different that's out there that we usually see. I mean, yes, putting the rock on the bank, that wasn't there, but that's kind of our way of trying to cement that bank where it needs to be, with all the other factors coming into it. And so it's really the best that we can do. And when we were talking about like the stone toe stabilization that we normally do and try to do the most often, just because it's less rock, is they take the excavator and basically take a big swath right at the where the water's meeting the bank, and dumping that rock right there, and really, what I would say, cementing the edge of the bank.
Yep, it's tying it in. It's really tying it into that whole river corridor, and so that we don't want the erosion. If we put the rock just on top of some sediment, the water would be washing away underneath, and then that rock would be unstable and start sliding. So what they're trying to do, especially on some in these driftless area, you can get right down to the sediment, or right down to the substrate and into the limestone, and get right down there, reconnect that stone to the stone that's on the bottom of the bank. And another thing too is, we're learning, our agencies are learning, our engineers are learning as we go. We used to rock that from the toe of the stream all the way to the top of the bank. And we, for a while there, we were leaving a lot of that rock exposed. Over time it would get grass and stuff growing, but we've learned that we can save a lot of money by not rocking it all the way to the top, which that's not really natural either. We're trying to get that base stabilized, and then we angle that soil back at a 10-to-1 slope, so get it seeded down to native grasses, and then let the natural look.
Basically just trying to reconnect that stream to its floodplain is really what we're trying to do, because I mean, if you look at a normal healthy stream, which I don't know how many of those truly exist, but they're out there. If you can have that water slowly rise up and not have to come with that crushing speed right away, I mean, that's really what we're looking for. So putting that armor there on the open face of the bank, and then connecting to the floodplain, is really what we're aiming to do. And now we've even taken it to where the little bit of rock we do put on there, we're covering it back up with soil and putting that seed down it right away, and then putting that erosion control blanket, which even helps even quicker trying to get that grass established. And within a year, 99% of the sites that we've done, you can't even tell there's rock there. I mean, you really got to dig in to find it.
Well, and that's a big part of it too, is that flood mitigation. Instead of just having that deep, narrow channel that's full, what we're trying to do is, like Hunter said, reconnect to your floodplain. So we actually will build in like a bench. So we'll have the stream will come up at an angle, go flat, and then go up another angle to reconnect that, so that when those floodwaters do come, they come up, they spread out on where there's a lot of grass. That helps slow the water down like it would naturally do. And a lot of times it spreads out into that floodplain then, and then that's great for habitat. You get a lot of those oxbows get refilled with water. A lot of these wetland marshes and things like that acts like kind of a buffer, a speed bump, honestly, is what it is. Like I said, having that narrow, fast speedway of water is not natural, so we're trying to reconnect that to the floodplain also.
Yeah, and some of the cooler things that we've kind of come across now, I mean, it's not, like we talked about earlier, we started with putting rock all the way to the top of the bank. Now we've changed, we're putting the dirt on top of the rock, and then we've changed to putting just a couple foot of rock, and now we're going to get to the point of natural stream bank restoration, where they're using what's out there. And so a lot of these streams are wooded areas, and there's a lot of trees that are shading the stream, and they need to be taken out during the project. And instead of hauling rock in, what they're doing is they're using the trees, the trunks out there, and using that as our stabilization part of it. And so they're burying these logs into the bank, covering them up, and using that as our cementing agent rather than using rock. And so, I mean, they call it we'd like to say a burrito, basically, is where they're stuffing all these logs and whatnot, and then they wrap it in a fabric, and try to tie it into the bank. And it's basically acting the same thing as using rock. But I mean, how the things have changed over the years is remarkable. And whoever thought about using what's already out there is probably a genius.
Yeah, it's one of those things we're trying to incorporate different things in it, and we may not have gotten completely to the burrito style bank, but we have been starting to use these root wads. Is what we do. Is what they do is they take a tree, probably 8 to 10 inches in diameter, which we usually have quite a few of those along the area where we're working. They can cut the tops off. Probably, I don't know. They probably leave about a 12 to 15 foot trunk on it. Take that root ball and place it downstream, right? Downstream, and then we bury that rest of that trunk up into the bank. Sometimes we'll lay like another log on top of it and bury that really holds it and cements it in. So it's kind of mimicking what you would see where a tree would, where we got these holes built into the stream, or not built into it, but they naturally occur because once again, that hydrology of water, anytime there's a boulder in the stream or a root ball, it creates a hole. Fantastic habitat for fish. So that's one of the things we're kind of replicating, and we've started incorporating that into some of our stream bank projects, and actually it looks pretty cool. And you would think, well, gosh, is that going to last? But if you keep that trunk submerged and that root ball underwater, it doesn't decay. It doesn't decay like where it has the air to it. So they do actually have a long life in it. But it is trying to use some of those natural materials that we have in the stream corridor to kind of replicate what Mother Nature would have.
Yeah, I mean, we're not just looking to put some rock on the bank and be done right then and there. I mean, we're really trying to do as much as we can to incorporate as much fish habitat, because that's really what we're trying to do. And these pots of money are fish driven, Trout Unlimited with the RCPP, and so we want to do the best job that we can to incorporate as much fish habitat structure out there. And so Neil talked about the root wads. That's something new that we've been using. It's a great way to use material and structure already out there. And then we've also been doing rock structures too, like Vortex Weirs. And so basically what that is keying some larger rocks into the bank, making like a U shape that's facing upstream, so that when that water hits, it's pushing the legs of it into the stream, really cementing it, and it's a strong structure then. And the water then goes over the top. It's got a notched out V in the middle, so that's not blocking fish passage. The water's able to come over the top. The fish are able to go through, move upstream, downstream, and right down from the vortex weir creates this large scour hole and creates a high oxygenated water area. Great for fish to hang out in, great for fish predation, but it's a great way to help control grade of the stream. If that's maybe some of our issues, if there's too much or too little of a slope in a stream, this is a great way that we can use to incorporate to really cement that hard bottom and create that grade change if we need to. But a great fish habitat structure that creates a great scour pool, or a pool of water down below where the fish are able to hang out and have some really high quality water right there.
Yeah, when we first started doing these, they call them Vortex Weirs. Like Hunter said, they got that V shape pointing upstream. And they're not only just straight, but they are lower in the center. So there's two aspects of that. It helps scour that hole out, which is awesome habitat for fish, because the deeper the pool is, the less the predator birds can see them and jump in and get the fish. But it also, you can like steer the stream a bit by the angle that you place that. So we will incorporate those into the stream bank areas where we've got that erosion on the bank, and we can actually steer that water a little bit to either avert hitting that bank or to kind of steer it back into the center of the stream. So once again, one of those hydrology things. One of the neat things of that Vortex Weir is we put a couple of them in a stretch of the Silver Creek, and we had done a fish survey where we go in with that low voltage shocking of the fish to see how many fish we have. And we probably did this we've done it a couple times now on the stream. But the first time we did it, there was a stretch of the stream had a lot of sediment in the base of it. The substrate had a lot of mud, a lot of really fine clays and things, and couldn't really see a lot of stone and things like that. But we usually do a 500-foot stretch of this shocking survey of a fish, and man, we were just having the hardest time finding anything. It was pretty shallow, a lot of sandbars, a lot of mud areas, and not seeing much. Well, we put the Streambank stabilization in this one stretch, put 2 of these Vortex Weirs in them. We came back about 3 years after they were incorporated, and we got up to where that Vortex Weir is, and below it, and this pool was probably about 4.5 feet deep and probably 20 feet long. The fish just boiled out of there. You know, we took that and it was like just night and day. But also, the bottom of the stream, it was back to stone and cobble and gravel, which is the habitat we need in these headland waters. Upstream from the bigger streams is where the fish go to breed and lay eggs and things. So they really need that stone and stuff on the bottom. But what a night and day effect because of that Vortex Weir, and by not contributing more sediment to the stream. It had cleaned that whole stretch out. Probably 1,000 feet of it had nice rock, and the fish species, the number of the fish, and just the different species, just like quadrupled.
Yeah, and I mean he alluded to the cobble bottoms and whatnot, and that's actually sometimes the problem we run into is we have such high quality streams in areas where we're shallow to bedrock and we're not able to get these large weir stones installed, and so then we got to go to kind of a second option, and they call them Boulder Clusters. It's basically just a series of 3 rocks that are placed in the stream a lot like a weir is, as far as grade control, fish habitat, and that sort of thing. But it basically does the same thing as you're putting these 3 stones in place in the stream, and then it creates a little bit of a scour or extra moving water, which then creates a scour hole and does the exact same thing as a Vortex Weir. But these boulder clusters were able to use smaller sized rocks in these smaller streams, where a Vortex Weir would not be feasible because it would block the flow of water. And so being able to have that second option that works just as well is really important. And I mean, yeah, we're not able to create a large scour hole as like what we would with the Vortex Weir, but being the second reason why we couldn't use a Vortex Weir, it's already got the hard bottom. We're not able to dig in with those Vortex Weirs. We already got check mark number 1 done, and so just adding this structure there is going to attract fish no matter what.
Mm-hmm. You know, another thing that we've got some problems with our fish habitat is the streams widen out, and they widen out to such an extent that the water gets shallow. You get more temperature pollution. Raising the temperature of these cold water streams is a problem. And so we get these areas that are naturally have widened out. So what we can do, there's a couple different processes we can do. Like what we talked about, restoring that bank, flood that little bench we can create. So we'll put this windrow rock a little bit further out into the stream, closer to the center, and then backfill that to create this shelf or bench, and then continue up. Another thing we can do is they call it a J hook, and kind of what it sounds like is we'll put a row of these. It's kind of like doing a Vortex Weir, but we're only doing it maybe halfway across the stream, and we angle it so that when the water hits it, it actually curls around behind it, and it slows down the water there, and it actually starts to fill in some sediment. So it will naturally start filling in the stream a bit, so that we narrow this up. Because the more narrow, the deeper the water is, especially on these cold water spring-fed streams, it's a way to keep that water cooler, and increases fish habitat. And like I said, once you get that deeper water, then you get some of this overhang vegetation, grasses, regrass, the banks, and that's excellent habitat for the fish. They'll be right up underneath there. They're hiding out. That's too, when we're doing these fish surveys with this low voltage shocking, you can reach right underneath with this probe, and them fish are, where they're hanging out. They're underneath those big root wads and grassy banks. And that was the other thing too, is like, we find these, it's going to be your outside banks where we have this issue, or like this J hook, it could be on a straighter stretch, but it's just widened out. But I've lost my train of thought on that one. I'll think of it.
The man, the myth, legend has talked too much and has forgot what he wanted to say, but that's all right. Hopefully, we can spark an interest here. But I mean, we've talked a lot about structures and whatnot, but I think something you guys maybe would want to hear is about what we're actually finding. I mean, there's a lot of different fish species out there that when we're doing these shockings that we find. But let's be honest, the number one thing we're truly looking for is brook trout. I mean, brook trout are the native species to Iowa. A lot of you guys maybe have trout fished in the past, or you've gone to the stocking streams and you've caught some rainbow trout, some brown trout. I bet you haven't caught too many brook trout. And so we're kind of special up here. We got a couple streams that we've been able to do some reintroduction of brook trout, native brook trout, that they've been able to do some genetic testing on and be able to get the sustained population going. And so these projects have then led to the reintroduction of brook trout. And I'll let Neil go, but let's do the short version of the brook trout reintroduction. Maybe we can save the long version for another episode.
I got so excited when you talked. I saw brook trouts coming up on what we were going to talk about. That's why I forgot what I was going to say, but I remembered. What it was is when we were talking about those really raw areas, and it's on those outside banks. What we're doing is we're trying to tie it into stable areas that we'll see those where it's grass right down to the edge of the stream, and then you've got that outside bank that's really raw. So we actually we have kind of a beginning and end of these stretches that we do. So it starts out where it's stable, and we go to where it's stable again. So that's what I forgot that I was going to say. But yeah, the brook trout, that is, that's really cool. So up in Pine Creek in Winnebago County, there is a stream there called Pine Creek, obviously, and it had the native brook trout. It's the only native trout in Iowa. The rainbow and the brown trout are introduced species to the area. The one thing about like brown trout and rainbow, they can survive in lower quality streams, whereas the brook trout require the most pristine, the coldest, the highest quality streams. So a few years ago, the DNR got to thinking, it's like, wow, we've got these Pine Creek brook trout, and wow, what if something happened to that stream? God forbid something where we had a fish kill or something. So they went out and they located about 15 streams in northeast Iowa that didn't have brook trout in, but they met all this criteria. They're high quality. They had plenty of those macroinvertebrates, small creatures and things for the fish, the brook trout to eat and thrive in. So with all the work we've been doing in the Silver Creek watershed, and that stream had trout in it 40 years ago, but they had been absent ever since that time. And we had done some shocking ahead of time just to see that. Because the other thing with brown trout, they're pretty competitive. So the brook trout, even though they're native, brown trout are kind of aggressive, and they would kind of beat up on them. So we were looking for these streams that didn't have trout in but were high quality. So the first year they came and asked if we were interested in this. I was like, heck yeah, that'd be fantastic. And so they brought 700 fingerlings, and they're probably about 2.5 inches in length. What they were doing is they were catching the females up in Pine Creek, taking the eggs from those, taking them down to Manchester, hatching them out, raising them up to a certain size, so that fingerling size, and bringing them to us usually in mid to late May, and then we would release them. So we had one site that we released them the first year back in 2017, and then that following March they came back and we did a survey, and here they were already there, like 6-8 inches long and doing really well. So they were pretty impressed how they were doing. So they said, well, we're going to put you back on the list for getting some more. So the next year they brought about 2,000, and then we released in the same site, and then we also released in an additional, the main stretch of the Silver Creek. And so we've done this now about 4 times, and the idea of that is to keep bringing in, is you can increase that genetic pool, because each time they're collecting eggs, unlikely that it would be the same females that we would be collecting eggs from. So they are doing very well. And the August of 2019, we had a young guy, like I mentioned before, that was getting his master's at Iowa State on trout hat migration. Came up, we did that fish survey, and lo and behold, we didn't put any fingerlings in that year, and that August we were finding fingerlings. So we know that they're naturally reproducing. This spring we went out and did a stretch, and we found all different sizes, and some of them were pretty nice and pretty big. So they're doing very well. And I've said with our water quality projects, we do a lot of water monitoring and things like that. But you can talk about data, till the cows come home. But graphs and this and that, and water's getting better. But man, there's nothing like holding a trout in your hand and showing that, and that definitely is a barometer of the quality of the stream and how far we've come in a short amount of time with all the work that the farmers in the watershed have done that have made that possible, that the water quality has improved that much that now we have naturally reproducing brook trout.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, it's great. We got these trout, and we won't disclose exactly where these trout are. You have to come up and try to find them yourself. But these are on streams that are owned by private landowners. So um, as of right now, it's not open to public fishing, but that might be an option here in the future. We never know. But nonetheless, one of our favorite things to do when we're working with landowners is see that self gratitude and see them enjoying their property. And I was at my baby's 4-month checkup this morning, and our doctor is a landowner on the Silver Creek, and had to show me some pictures of some fish that her sons had caught. And so what they were doing, they were out there the other day, and they seen these grasshoppers jumping from the grass into the stream, and the trout were going after them right away. And they're like, "Wait, maybe we need to use grasshoppers." And so they caught a jar of grasshoppers. They put them on their hooks, they threw them out, and they were just catching them one after another. I was like, that makes sense. I mean, that's one way to see how the natural selection works and what they're actually trying to eat and stuff at different times of the year. And so that's always fun to hear the stories from the landowners on what they've done and enjoying their property beyond what they ever thought they maybe could. So,
Well, that's a pretty good little secret. I was going to use a piece of cheese, but I guess apparently grasshoppers is the secret to
hey, it's
brook
just
trout.
like it's just like every other project corner or office. They have their all secrets and trades. It's whether you let the secrets and trades out would make you successful sometimes. But I mean, the fish are an awesome thing. It's great to see, and it's only going to get better from here on out. But I mean, the other thing, I mean, yeah, trout are awesome, but the other thing we like to see is we like to see keeping that sediment up on the landscape, not seeing it go down the stream. And so when we were working on these stream bank projects, our main goal is sediment reduction. We don't want to see that sediment going down the stream, but what comes with sediment is phosphorus. Phosphorus attaches to that sediment particle, and so anytime you see the sediment going down the stream, there goes a large amount of phosphorus. And so one thing that we have to do with our watershed projects is we have to use a pollution calculator, they call it. And so every project that we do, whether it's cover crops, grass waterways, stream bank stabilization, everything, it's got a certain value that's calculated based on the project, the amount of acres, the length, whatever it may be, and gives us a value of how much phosphorus, sediment, nitrates that are reduced from that water body at the bottom. And so these stream bank stabilization projects can contribute a very large amount of sediment and phosphorus. And so being able to do these projects and keep that up on the stream reduces a lot of sediment, sometimes anywhere from 500 to 1,000 tons or 1,000 pounds of sediment and phosphorus per segment.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of science into this whole hydrology of water. And TMDL, total maximum daily load. Now, that can be a nutrient. It can be, whether it's phosphorus or nitrates or things like that. But one of them is sediment. So the stream water body can carry so much sediment through that course. So depending on how much water flow there is and things like that. So not only do we get sediment off the landscape, whether it's coming off the crop fields, like we talked about that, where our goal is to keep things down to 5 tons of soil loss per acre per year. So eventually that's going to get to the streams because everything goes to the stream. Well, another contributor of sediment is within the stream, and that's where these stream bank projects come into play, where we're working on stabilizing these banks, because the amount of sediment, like we were talking about, this post-settlement alluvium, it slid off the hilltops, now it's in the valleys, it's all moving downstream. Slowly but surely it's going to get there. So if we can reduce the amount of sediment that's getting into the stream and have it less than what is being contributed, it will actually clean out that sediment. So here we just did a project about 1,600 feet of stream bank stabilization on a segment of Silver Creek this spring, probably late May. And I don't know, we love taking pictures of our project stuff and different things. And I thought, oh shoot, we were out. It was a spot where we weekly or bi-weekly take water sampling off of. So I just took a picture, and I'm like looking down, and I said, Hunter, you see what I see? This stretch was very full of sediment. I mean, you would walk on it and you'd probably sink in 8 to 12 inches of sediment, sandbars and that. We from the bridge could see upstream, and you could see stone, you could see cobble, and then we started seeing vegetation. Because another thing, if you get too much sediment in the bottom, you're not going to get those aquatic vegetative plants that like cold water. And it was just night and day. I mean, I did water sampling today at that same site. I just had to stand there for a little while just to look, because it's every 2 weeks it just is getting better and better, because all that sediment is moving out. It's cleaning it out because we're not contributing more sediment to the stream than it can carry. If you put more sediment than the stream can carry, the sediment builds up in the bottom. If you can reduce the amount of sediment getting to the stream, it'll clean that out and it'll get back down to that natural stone bottom. And that's where the fish like to swim, lay their eggs, and eat. And the other thing too is, so when we do the studies about the macroinvertebrates, all the little animals and stuff, you pick up a rock in the stream, you turn it upside down, it is just crawling with insects and all those little mussels and tiny snails and things that the fish are eating. So if you have the habitat for the macroinvertebrates and all the feed to feed the fish, then you get the fish. So it's just this dynamic turnaround, and you just get the momentum of recreating that more natural stream body.
Yeah, and that's when we talked about it earlier, is connecting what you're doing up on the landscape also affects what we're doing in the stream. And so that's really where we need to kind of really start targeting, is we've been working a lot up on the landscape with the uplands, the cover crops, the CRP, the no-till, whatever it may be, all contributes extra sediment down into the stream, and then we're able to start doing some of these stream bank projects. Otherwise, we're always going to be working uphill. We're going to be trying to swim up river, whatever you want to use for an analogy or whatever. But I mean, we really need to do a lot of work up on the landscape, up on the uplands, and that'll help us working in the stream, and that'll give us a little bit of a leg up. Otherwise, if all we did was stream bank restoration or stream bank stabilization, we wouldn't get very far. We'd have a lot of sediment in the stream. We wouldn't necessarily be solving what we should be if we're not working up on the landscape.
Well, the long-term benefit, it benefits a lot of people. And one of the things it benefits is the economics of Northeast Iowa. We're known for our trout streams. We're known for fishing. And if we can do something to help restore those fisheries naturally in the headlands of the waters, like Hunter said, we're at the kind of to the top of the Upper Iowa River. We're top of the Turkey River, that's for sure. We're at the headwaters, and the Wapsipinicon. So we got three major watersheds here where we're at the headwaters, and that's where a lot of these fish migrate to reproduce, and that and talking about that sediment, Hunter alluded to the phosphorus that attaches to sediment, because the Iowa's nutrient reduction strategy, that's a big goal that the state has set out to do, is to improve our water quality. And if we can reduce that sediment carrying that phosphorus, and another thing, like Silver Creek, my main pollutant that we're trying to correct is too much bacteria. So that bacteria also can connect to the E. coli, can hang on to that sediment also. So it's just a win-win. It's helping the fisheries, it's helping the water quality, and like I said, it's helping the economics. The amount of money that comes to Northeast Iowa for trout fishing and other recreational fishing is tremendous. So it's it's kind of one of those economic drivers that is kind of unseen, but it's out there.
Yeah, I just Googled it real quick. How much money does trout fishing in Iowa bring to the state? And I didn't necessarily get the Iowa number, but I got Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, and it's $1.6 billion that it brings in. Mm-hmm. And I know that's a 3-state area. It's the driftless area is what it's really focusing on. It was a news article from the Des Moines Register. But $1.6 billion is a lot of money. I mean, think about a trout stamp. It costs you, what, $12.50, $13 now, I think. Mm-hmm. Your fishing license, another 20-some. I mean, so you got about $30, $35 wrapped up in a fishing license trout stamp. And then you get people who are coming from Minnesota, southern Iowa, western Iowa, Pennsylvania. I remember I was down in Fayette one time trout fishing with some buddies, and we ran into a guy from far east Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. He was coming here. He was going to be trout fishing for a week. So that means he's got a hotel room. He's eating at restaurants. He's buying gas. He's getting all these lures and whatnot. I mean, he's spending a lot of money just that one person for a week of trout fishing. And some people like it more than I do. I don't know if I could get myself to go trout fishing in Northeast Iowa
Yeah.
for a week, but when you've never done it before, you don't have the opportunity. We got some pretty awesome streams up here, and so to be able to build these streams like a Silver Creek or a Mullen Creek, Minor Creek project that you maybe used to have trout and be able to reintroduce those native brook trout, and hopefully will lead to maybe some public fishing easements or whatever it may be in the future. That's a lot of money bringing back to Howard County.
Absolutely.
That was never there in the first place.
I might have brook trout in my watershed, but Hunter has a pretty cool thing in his watershed, and it's the Rock Rapids, the Arch Rapids down at Vernon. If you've ever been to Cresco or the area, you got to go down to Vernon Springs. It's just a short couple miles, mile and a half, 2 miles south of Cresco itself, just beyond the airport. And what we did is we had a lowhead dam that was damaged in the '08 flood. And instead of removing the dam, which would have ruined the aesthetics of the area, it's got a beautiful impoundment pond along the Cresco Country Club, and a lot of people recreate there. And so what they did is we built this Arch Rapids with the help of an individual engineer of DNR from Minnesota, because it was one of the first ones they did in Iowa. It's called mitigation of a dam. And so we don't take the dam out, so we get the best of both things. We do a fish ladder, which allows the fish to go up. So this Arch Rapids has all these pools with the stonework that's been set up to the height of the dam. So it's over a long, slow grade, so this fish can migrate up. And the coolest thing was, before that was put in, Iowa DNR Fisheries tagged a bunch of game fish down below, and then the Arch Rapids was completed and reconnected that downstream to the uplands and headwaters. And here they came in a few weeks later, and they were finding some of those tagged fish that were below the dam, which had no way of ever getting back above it without this kind of fish ladder. And so that has definitely improved the fish habitat and abilities for those fish to get back up into those headwaters. Like I said, a lot of them, that's where they breed and lay their eggs and things. And there's been some pretty neat game fish in that Vernon Pond.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm not a big trout fisherman, but you say you want to go walleye fishing, bass fishing, northern fishing, yeah, I'm in 100%. And so those are kind of the three most important species up here in the Turkey River. And so I would call what we say is the Mill Pond or Vernon Springs, aka the Turkey River, is a world-class fishery. I mean, there's been multiple walleyes caught over 30 inches. Northerns caught over 40 inches, pushing almost 20 pounds, and tons and tons and tons and tons of smallmouth bass. And they've even been found up in the little creeks, like I said, something that barely has been generated from a tile line. They found them up in these small headwaters spawning. And so to have those high quality streams is really important. And so incorporating that new Arch Rapids or the fish ladder has been tremendous for the fishery, and it's an unknown secret that a lot of people don't know about, and so hopefully this podcast doesn't ruin it. But nonetheless, we'll take all the dollars and economic development that we can get.
Well, what's also cool is Turkey River is not a cold water stream; it's a warm water stream. But we have these, being we're in the driftless area, we have these cold water streams that are dumping into it, just like along the upper Iowa River, you'll have all these cold water streams that dump into it. But by reconnecting those passages through the dams, now you've allowed some of those trout to make their way up and find those cold water streams, and that's exactly what they're doing. We're finding these cold water streams, tributaries to the Turkey River, and now we've got wonderful reproducing trout in those also. They're brown trout, but same difference. They're enjoying that cold water, and we've been doing a lot of studies on these streams as far as not only just the water sampling of the different parameters, but setting these temperature gauges. So, we're documenting that we actually do have these cold water streams, and they're benefiting from a multitude of practices, and some big, some small. But in all, the streams, like I said, that training we go to every year with our watershed projects. If you've got a stream in your watershed, which everybody does, that's just one aspect that we really want to look at. And like I said, it has not only the fisheries benefit, but that nutrient reduction in those streams. And that's a big part of why we have projects, is to help out with that Iowa nutrient reduction strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're winding down. We're getting here about an hour on the podcast, and so we try our best to keep it an hour or less, and so we're getting there. But I'd be dismiss to say if all these projects and fish we're talking about, if you want to get a chance to take a peek at some, look us up on Facebook or Instagram, Hunter Slifka and Neil Schaefer. We each have our private personal pages that we post a lot of these projects on and talk about a lot of the work we do, and so that gets showcased there. We'll also try to incorporate some different videos and whatnot here in the near future. But check those out where you can find them there. If you find us, we always got our cell phones on us, and we're always willing to share the pictures that way. And so we're always looking a way to outreach and send out all the information that we can. But
Yeah, I mean, our whole idea here is to help inform people about what we do and what work is being done in Iowa, and especially in our community. But please share that. I mean, anytime we'll be posting how to connect to this podcast, whether it's on YouTube or Spotify. Please share that. That helps to get the message out, and hopefully you continue following us. I got to think, it's like, wow, we're just going to talk about one practice, but wow, can you see? We had a whole hour worth of things to talk about this, so can't wait. Don't know for sure what our next week's topic will be, but I assure you it will be pretty interesting, and hopefully we get you some really good information about it.
yeah, so wherever you guys are listening from, whatever platform it is, let us know what you like, what you don't like. I'm sure you guys can find our cell phones, or you can find our information somewhere. You can drop us a DM or whatever it may be. We're always looking for feedback. Obviously, this is uncut, raw footage. We had a guy last time. We we did the video in the morning and started up, and he goes, "How long did you guys spend on revisions and editing?" I said, "What editing? This is raw, uncut footage.
Yeah.
We literally hit stop record and upload within
Yep.
2 minutes."
You get if we make a mistake or I forget my train of thought, that's really happening.
Yeah.
And we're not going to try to mask over, nothing's going to end up on the cutting room floor. So
No, we're doing the best we can to provide the best information out there. I mean, there's a lot of things that go on in the office here, and that's really why we wanted to say it's Beyond the Dirt, because it's easy to look at soil, it's easy to look at corn and beans, but really understanding what goes on behind the scenes, or beyond the dirt, as you could say, is important. And seeing kind of what we can offer to you guys is important to us, and we always like to talk about our projects and our information and stuff like that. And so we're going to sign off. We're heading down to Dubuque this week for the Iowa Water Conference, the first one back the last couple of years with a COVID hiatus. And so it's going to be great to get some new information. And maybe that's what we'll have to talk about when we get back, is all the things we learned down at the conference.
I'm really looking forward to it. We haven't had one of these conferences since 2019, so it's going to be good to meet up with old colleagues and make new friends and do some of that networking, and definitely sit in on some really informative breakout sessions. And it could be we might have enough information that we gather, we might want to share that next week.
Yeah, we'll see what we can come up with. So we're going to sign off here, episode number 2 of Beyond the Dirt. Thanks, guys.